Before we start, like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel with a super thanks or by joining. I saw things in the war that would destroy most people. I watched my friends die in my arms, pulled the trigger I wished I hadn't, and looked into the eyes of enemies whose sole desire was to end my existence. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered during a routine night patrol in the wilds of the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. My name is Captain Elias Markham, and the event I am about to describe took place in October 2019 during a standard training exercise at Camp Dawson. I have kept this story to myself for years, sharing it only with the two men who were with me that night. But the images, the sounds, the overwhelming sense of wrongness, they have haunted me every night since. And I realized that silence no longer protects me. It consumes me. This is what happened when my team came face to face with something that wore the skin of nature, but moved with the intention of a predator far more sinister than anything evolution ever designed. Camp Dawson sits nestled in the mountains of Preston County, West Virginia, right on the border with Maryland. It's a West Virginia Army National Guard training center sprawling across thousands of acres of dense Appalachian forest. The facility has been training soldiers since World War II, and in that time it's earned a reputation for being one of the most realistic wilderness training environments in the eastern United States. The terrain is unforgiving. Steep ridges, dense undergrowth, and forests so thick that even in broad daylight, the canopy can swallow the sun whole. I'd been stationed there for 3 years by the time this incident occurred, serving as a training officer for various National Guard units rotating through for their annual qualifications. It was good duty, challenging, meaningful, and far enough from the political circus of larger installations that you could actually focus on training soldiers instead of playing bureaucratic games. October in the Appalachians is something special. The leaves turn into this impossible palette of golds, oranges, and deep crimsons. The air carries that perfect crisp bite that makes you feel alive with every breath. But when the sun goes down, the mountains transform into something else entirely. The temperature drops fast, fog rolls in from the valleys, and the darkness isn't just an absence of light, it's a presence all its own. Our training rotation that week was for a reserve unit out of Pittsburgh, primarily focused on land navigation and tactical movement in low-light conditions. Nothing exotic, nothing dangerous, just good old-fashioned grunt work to keep skills sharp. The exercise was simple. Small teams would navigate through predetermined checkpoints across a 12-mile route, using only map, compass, and night vision equipment. Standard stuff that every infantry soldier has done 100 times. I was running the exercise with Sergeant Cole Reddington and Specialist Drew Halverson, both solid soldiers I'd worked with extensively. Cole was a grizzled veteran in his late 30s, former active duty with 2 deployments to Afghanistan under his belt. He had that 1,000-yard stare that combat veterans develop, but he was also one of the most competent tactical instructors I'd ever worked with. Drew was younger, mid-20s, National Guard through and through, but eager and competent. He'd grown up hunting in these mountains, which made him invaluable for the wilderness portions of training. The plan was straightforward. We'd shadow the trainee teams from a distance, monitoring their progress and intervening only if safety became an issue. We'd done it dozens of times before. The route took teams through some of the more challenging terrain on base, skirting the eastern boundary where Camp Dawson property line meets the Monongahela National Forest. It was isolated, rugged, and perfect for testing a soldier's ability to navigate under pressure. We started the exercise at 2100 hours, 9 p.m. for civilians. The last trainee team had departed their start point 30 minutes prior, and we were maintaining a tactical follow at roughly 200 meters distance. The moon was only a sliver that night, which meant visibility was minimal even with our night vision equipment. We were using the latest PVS 14 monoculars, which turned the darkness into varying shades of green and give you enough visibility to move effectively without breaking your neck on the terrain. The first 2 hours were completely routine. We watched the trainee team navigate competently through the first 3 checkpoints, only intervening once when they started to drift too far south toward a particularly nasty ravine. Standard instructor stuff. The radios were quiet except for periodic check-ins with base operations. Everything was professional, controlled, exactly as it should be. It was around 23:15 hours when things started to feel off. We were moving through a section of forest that the local soldiers called the Narrows, a stretch of terrain where 2 ridgelines converge into a shallow valley, creating this natural corridor about 300 meters wide. The vegetation was thick here, a mix of oak, maple, and dense mountain laurel that made movement slow and deliberate. The ground was carpeted with fallen leaves that had accumulated over decades, creating this thick, damp layer that muffled sound. Drew was on point, with me in the middle and Cole pulling rear security. We were moving in a loose wedge formation, maintaining noise discipline and tactical spacing. The trainee team was somewhere ahead of us, their IR markers occasionally visible through my night vision as they navigated toward checkpoint 4. That's when Drew froze. He didn't say anything, didn't signal, just stopped dead in his tracks with his weapon coming up into a low, ready position. In tactical movement, when your point man stops, everyone stops. No questions asked. I immediately took a knee, scanning my sector while Cole did the same behind me. "Drew," I whispered into my radio, keeping my voice barely audible. "Movement," he replied, his voice tight. 11 o'clock, maybe 50 meters. Something big. I shifted my focus to the direction he indicated, scanning through my night vision. At first, I didn't see anything except the ghostly green landscape of trees and undergrowth. Then I caught it, a thermal signature moving between the trees, perpendicular to our position. "Could be a deer," Cole suggested quietly. "We're in their territory." Drew didn't respond immediately, and I noticed his posture hadn't relaxed at all. That bothered me. Drew had been hunting these mountains since he was a kid. He knew the difference between regular wildlife and something worth being concerned about. "Cap," Drew said slowly, "deer don't move like that." I focused more intently on the thermal signature. He was right. There was something off about the movement pattern. It was too deliberate, too measured. Deer browse. They move in fits and starts, pausing to feed, their heads bobbing as they scan for threats. This thing was moving with purpose, almost pacing back and forth through a 30-meter stretch of forest like it was patrolling. "Could be a bear," I offered, though I didn't believe it even as I said it. We had black bears in the area, but they didn't move like that either. "No," Drew said flatly. "Watch it." We watched in silence for almost 3 minutes as the thermal signature continued its back and forth pattern. The movement was hypnotic in its consistency, almost mechanical. Every pass it made was nearly identical to the last, same path, same speed, same turning points. Then it stopped. Just completely stopped, right in the middle of its path. Through the night vision, I could make out its shape more clearly now. It was definitely quadrupedal, roughly the size and shape of a large white-tailed deer, but something about its proportions seemed wrong in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. "What's it doing?" Cole whispered. "I think," Drew said slowly, "I think it knows we're here." The moment he said that, the thing's head turned directly toward our position. Even through the grainy green display of night vision, I could see it clearly now. It was a deer, or at least, it looked like one. White tail, the right general body shape, the tall ears. But those eyes, deer eyes, when caught in light or viewed through night vision, typically show a dull shine, almost like looking at small mirrors. These eyes were different. They glowed with an intensity I'd never seen in wildlife, burning with a deep crimson that seemed to pulsate even through the night vision's green filter. The effect was deeply unsettling, like looking at hot coals embedded in a skull. "That's not normal," Cole said, and I heard something I'd never heard in his voice before, uncertainty tinged with fear. The deer, if that's what it was, didn't move. It just stood there, staring directly at us with those burning eyes, its body completely motionless. No breathing visible in its flanks, no ear twitching, nothing. It was frozen like a statue except for those eyes that seemed to bore through the darkness and vegetation straight into us. "Drew," I said quietly, "you ever seen a deer's eyes do that?" "No, sir," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never." We maintained our position, none of us moving, all of us fixated on this thing that had locked onto our location. The forest around us had gone completely silent. I hadn't noticed when it happened, but the usual background noise of the Appalachian night, the insects, the distant calls of owls, the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, all of it was gone. The only sound was our breathing, and the occasional rustle of equipment as one of us shifted weight. Then, slowly, deliberately, the deer began to walk toward us. Not the startled bound-and-run motion of a surprised animal, not the cautious approach of curious wildlife. This was a walk, a purposeful, measured, almost human cadence to its movement. Each step was placed with careful precision, its gait smooth and unnatural for a creature that should be moving on hooves through dense undergrowth. "That ain't right," Cole muttered, and his weapon came up to a ready position. As it got closer, more details became visible through the night vision, and each new detail made my skin crawl more than the last. The deer's neck was wrong. I could see what looked like deep lacerations or scars cutting through its fur, old wounds that had healed into thick, rope-like keloid tissue. Some of them looked deliberate, almost like someone had carved patterns into its flesh. Its antlers were there, but they were malformed. Instead of the graceful symmetry you'd expect, they grew at odd angles, some points curving inward toward its skull, others jutting out in directions that seemed anatomically impossible. Portions of the antlers appeared to be coated in something dark and wet that glistened in the night vision. But the worst part, the detail that made my training and experience scream that something was fundamentally wrong, was its movement. With each step, its joints seemed to bend at slightly incorrect angles. The knees hyperextended just a fraction too far. The ankles rolled in ways that should have caused the animal to stumble. It was like watching something that had studied how a deer should move, but couldn't quite replicate it correctly. "Captain," Drew said, his voice tight with tension. "Permission to engage?" My mind raced through protocols. We were on a training exercise. Weapons were loaded with live ammunition for security purposes, but discharging them required justification. Was this thing a threat? It was moving toward us, yes, but it was still just an animal. A weird, deeply unsettling animal, but still within the realm of wildlife we might encounter. "Hold fire," I said, though every instinct I had was screaming to light it up. "Let's move lateral. Put some distance between us." We began to shift our position, moving perpendicular to the deer's approach vector. Standard tactical movement for avoiding wildlife. You don't turn and run, which triggers predatory response, but you don't hold ground either. You laterally displace, allowing the animal to continue past without confrontation. The deer stopped walking. Its head tracked our movement with mechanical precision, those red eyes never leaving us. Then, impossibly, it began to sidestep, maintaining the same distance and angle to our position. It was matching our movement, compensating for our displacement like a human would, like something with tactical awareness would. "Fuck this," Cole said, abandoning whispers. "That's not a deer." He was right. Whatever we were looking at, however much it looked like a deer in shape and structure, it was not behaving like any animal I'd encountered in 20 years of outdoor experience and military service. The wrongness of it was overwhelming. triggering something primal in my brain that predated language or conscious thought. "Thermal," I said to Drew. "Give me a thermal read on that thing." Drew was carrying our IR-210 thermal optic as part of his observer kit. He quickly brought it up, scanning the creature that was now maybe 30 meters away and still matching our movements. "Jesus," Drew breathed. "Captain, you need to see this." He passed me the thermal optic, and what I saw made absolutely no sense. In thermal imaging, living creatures show up as bright signatures because of body heat, with variations in temperature creating a clear outline of anatomy. Warmer areas like the core and head show brighter, cooler extremities show dimmer. This thing's thermal signature was wrong. Its body temperature wasn't consistent. Patches of it showed normal deer thermal range, bright areas indicating living, warm-blooded tissue, but other sections, particularly around those scarred areas on its neck and portions of its legs, showed much cooler, almost ambient temperature. It was like looking at a patchwork of living and dead tissue somehow fused together and walking around. "That's not possible," I said, more to myself than my team. "Cap," Cole said urgently, "it's getting closer." I looked up from the thermal optic. He was right. While we'd been examining it, the deer had closed the distance to about 20 meters. It was still matching our lateral movement, but it was also slowly advancing, patient and methodical. That's when I noticed its breathing, or rather, the lack of it. Even at this distance, through night vision, I should have been able to see the rise and fall of its flanks, should have been able to see breath condensing in the cold October air. But there was nothing. Its body was perfectly still except for that slow, deliberate walking motion. "All right," I said, making a command decision. "Drew, illuminate it. Let's see what we're actually dealing with here." Drew unclipped the surefire flashlight mounted to his rifle and pointed it at the deer. The moment before he activated it, I saw those red eyes flare even brighter, almost like the thing knew what was coming. The flashlight stabbed through the darkness like a sword, 1,000 lumens of white light cutting through the fog and illuminating the creature in stark, horrible detail. I wish to God we'd kept the lights off. In the harsh white light, everything wrong about this animal became viscerally, horrifyingly clear. The scars I'd seen on its neck weren't just healed wounds. They were precise, deliberate cuts that went deep enough to expose underlying tissue. Some of them were recent, still seeping a black, tar-like substance that definitely wasn't blood. Others had healed into these thick, grotesque ridges of scar tissue that created a pattern almost like symbols. Its fur was matted and wrong, clumped together in places with the same black substance that leaked from its wounds. In other areas, the fur was missing entirely, revealing skin that had a grayish, almost necrotic quality to it. The antlers were worse under direct light. What I'd thought was wetness was actually that same black substance, but it was moving, slowly dripping down the malformed bone in thick rivulets. Where it touched the deer's fur, smoke or steam rose from the contact point, as if the substance was caustic. But the eyes... God, the eyes were the worst part. Under the flashlight beam, they didn't reflect like normal deer eyes. They didn't have that typical tapetum lucidum shine. Instead, they absorbed the light, these deep black pits ringed with that pulsing red glow, and looking into them created this overwhelming sensation of vertigo, like staring into a void that was staring back with malevolent intelligence. The deer's mouth hung slightly open, and I could see its teeth. Deer are herbivores. They should have flat, grinding molars and small incisors. This thing's teeth were wrong, sharp, too many of them, arranged in rows that seemed to go back far deeper into its throat than should be anatomically possible. Then it smiled. I know how that sounds. Deer can't smile. They don't have the facial musculature for human expressions. But I watched its lips pull back in something that could only be described as a smile, revealing more of those impossible teeth, while those void-like eyes maintained their locked gaze on us. "Back up," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. Tactical retreat. Maintain visual contact. We began to walk backward, weapons up, lights trained on the creature. It didn't pursue immediately. It just stood there in the cone of illumination, that horrifying smile fixed on its face, head cocked at an angle that made my spine crawl. We'd moved maybe 10 meters when it took a step forward. Just one step, but the way it did it was all wrong. The front legs moved together in this synchronized motion that looked more like a person in a costume than an actual quadruped. The sound its hooves made on the leaf litter wasn't the typical click-clack you'd expect. It was softer, almost muffled, like the sound was being absorbed rather than echoed. "Keep moving," Cole said unnecessarily. We were all thinking the same thing. Get the hell away from this thing. That's when we heard it. A sound that came from the deer's direction but couldn't possibly be coming from the deer. It started as a low vibration that you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. Then it rose in pitch until it became this vocalization that was part wheeze, part whistle, part something organic and wrong that I can't adequately describe. The closest comparison I can make is if you took the sound of a dying rabbit's scream, slowed it down, and mixed it with the resonance of wind blowing across a deep cave mouth. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. It pierced through the forest with this quality that made you feel like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. And underneath it, if you listened carefully, there was almost a rhythm to it, a cadence that was disturbingly close to human speech patterns. Drew made a sound I'd never heard from him before, a small, involuntary whimper. "What the fuck is that?" Cole demanded, though we all knew none of us had an answer. The deer, the thing, began to walk toward us again, still in that measured, mechanical pace. This time, it didn't stop to match our movements. It was actively pursuing us. "Increase pace," I ordered. "Maintain light contact, but move with purpose." We accelerated our backward movement, trying to maintain tactical awareness while putting distance between us and whatever that thing was. But I quickly realized we had a problem. Behind us, maybe 200 meters back, were the trainees we were supposed to be monitoring. We couldn't lead this thing directly to them. "Hang on," I said, stopping our retreat. "We need to redirect it away from the trainees." "Captain, with all due respect," Cole said, his voice tight, "I think we need to drop this fucking thing and sort out the paperwork later." He wasn't wrong. Everything in my tactical training was screaming that we were dealing with a threat. But there was something else, something deeper and more primal, that was also screaming at me. A voice that said if we shot this thing, if we tried to harm it, something much worse was going to happen. "Not yet," I said, making a decision based purely on instinct. "Flank left. We're going to try to draw it away from the trainee route." We began to move laterally again, angling away from the path our trainees would be taking. For a moment, I didn't think it was going to work. The thing just stood there, watching us with those horrible eyes, that smile still fixed on its face. Then, slowly, it turned and began to follow our new vector. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived, because as it turned, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The deer's body was facing one direction, but its head had rotated a full 180 degrees, maintaining eye contact with us the entire time. The neck twisted at an angle that should have been anatomically impossible, vertebrae clearly visible through the patches of missing fur, that black substance oozing from the scars with each degree of rotation. "Oh, Jesus," Drew whispered. "Oh, Jesus Christ." We kept moving, and it kept following, maintaining that same measured distance. We were leading it now, drawing it away from the trainees and deeper into the section of forest that bordered the national park. With every step, I was aware that we were getting farther from support, farther from backup, deeper into terrain that grew increasingly hostile. The fog was getting thicker. October fog in the Appalachians is like walking through wet cotton. It doesn't just reduce visibility, It seems to muffle sound and create this disorienting spatial distortion where distances become impossible to judge accurately. Between the fog and our night vision, we were operating in this nightmarish green world where our flashlight beams only penetrated about 15 meters before being swallowed completely. But we could still see it following us, that thermal signature showing those patches of living and dead tissue, those red eyes glowing through the fog like demonic lanterns. We'd moved perhaps 400 meters off our original course when the terrain began to change. The ground started to slope downward. We were entering one of the many small ravines that cut through this area. The vegetation got even denser, the trees closer together, and visibility dropped to nearly nothing, even with our lights. "Captain," Drew said, "we're getting into really rough terrain here. If we go much farther, it's going to be dangerous to move tactically." He was right. The slope was getting steeper, and in the dark, one wrong step could mean a broken ankle or worse. But that thing was still behind us, still following with that patient, horrible persistence. "Find us a defensible position," I ordered. "Somewhere we can set up and observe without risk of losing our footing." Cole spotted it first, a natural formation of rocks about 30 meters ahead that created a small shelf overlooking the ravine. It would give us elevation advantage and a stable position to maintain observation. We reached the rocks and set up a hasty defensive position, creating what we call a strong point in tactical terms. I was in the center with the radio and thermal optic. Cole and Drew took flanking positions with overlapping fields of fire. We maintained light discipline, using only our IR illuminators visible through night vision instead of white light. The thing emerged from the fog about 50 meters below our position. In the IR light, it looked even more wrong. The night vision stripped away color, rendering everything in shades of green, which somehow made the wrongness of its proportions and movement even more apparent. It stopped at the bottom of the slope, that head rotating again as it scanned upward toward our position. Then it started to climb, not the bounding, athletic climb of a real deer navigating difficult terrain. This was deliberate, calculated. It placed each hoof with precision, testing the ground before committing its weight. The movement was slow but inexorable, like watching a hunter who knows its prey is cornered and can afford to take its time. "Captain," Cole said quietly, "I have a clear shot." My thumb hovered over my radio transmit button. I should call this in. I should report contact with what? What would I even say? We've encountered what appears to be a deer but probably isn't. That's not how you make reports that get taken seriously. The thing was halfway up the slope now, close enough that I could see more details through the night vision. Its movements were getting more erratic as it climbed, joints bending at increasingly wrong angles. At one point, I watched its hind leg fold completely backward at the knee, bend in a direction that should have shattered the joint, then snap back into a forward position with an audible crack that echoed through the ravine. "That's not right," Drew breathed. "That's not fucking right." 20 meters now, close enough that I could hear it moving, hear the soft displacement of leaves and soil under its hooves. Close enough that I could hear something else too, a wet, grinding sound coming from inside it, like the sound of joints moving without enough cartilage, bone grinding against bone. 15 meters. Those eyes locked onto mine. I felt something in that moment, something I can only describe as a presence inside my head. Not thoughts exactly, but an overwhelming sensation of being watched from the inside out, of being evaluated and found. Wanting. Amusing. It was hard to articulate, but the feeling was violating in a way that made my skin crawl. 10 meters. I could smell it now. Not the musty, earthy smell of a normal deer. This was wrong. A combination of rot and something chemical, acrid and burning that made my eyes water even through the damp fog. "Captain," Cole said with more urgency, "call it." 5 meters. It stopped. Just stopped moving completely, becoming as still as a statue carved from stone. The only movement was those eyes, tracking slowly from me to Drew to Cole and back again, studying each of us in turn. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out was nothing like the vocalization we'd heard before. This was dry, rasping, and underneath it, clear as day, I heard what sounded like words. Not words in any language I recognized, but the cadence was unmistakable, syllables and rhythm that suggested meaning and intent. And somehow, impossibly, I understood the intent even if I didn't understand the language. It was claiming us, not threatening us, not warning us away, claiming us, marking us as its property, as things it had found and now owned by some twisted rule of whatever reality it existed in. That's when my radio crackled to life. Alpha 1, this is base, requesting status check. Trainee team has reached checkpoint 4, confirm visual contact. The deer's head snapped toward me with that horrible neck rotation, fixating on the radio mounted to my chest rig. Those eyes burned brighter, the red glow intensifying until I could see it even through the night vision's green filter. I keyed the mic, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. Base Alpha 1, we have a situation developing, requesting immediate extraction for trainee team and standby QRF. Quick reaction force. A security team kept on standby for emergencies. I was calling in the cavalry, though, God help me, I didn't know what I was going to tell them when they arrived. Alpha 1, say again, did you say QRF? Before I could respond, the deer moved. It didn't climb the rest of the way up to our position. Instead, it did something I've replayed in my mind 1,000 times and still can't fully process. It turned. Its body turned, but in segments. The front half rotated one direction, the back half another, creating this twisted configuration that should have torn it apart. Its neck bent at impossible angles, vertebrae clearly visible, pushing against the skin, creating bumps and ridges that moved independently like there were multiple spinal columns all shifting against each other. Then it started to back away, not walking backward. That would be too normal. It was retreating while maintaining that twisted, segmented configuration, moving down the slope with disturbing speed while its head remained locked onto our position, eyes never blinking, mouth still open in that parody of a smile. Within seconds, it had disappeared back into the fog and darkness. "What the hell was that?" Drew demanded, his voice cracking. "I don't know," I admitted. "Cole, you got thermal on it?" Cole had already pulled up his thermal optic, scanning the area where the thing had disappeared. "Negative, Captain. No thermal signature anywhere in the sector. It's just gone." "That's impossible," I said, "and we just saw it. It was right there." "I'm telling you, sir, thermal shows nothing, not even residual heat. It's like it was never there." My radio crackled again. "Alpha 1, please confirm QRF request. We need clarification on the situation." I took a breath, trying to organize my thoughts into something resembling a coherent tactical report. How do you report something like this? How do you put into words what we'd just experienced? Base, Alpha 1. We encountered wildlife exhibiting unusual behavior patterns, potentially dangerous to trainee operations. Request QRF to secure training area and facilitate extraction. There was a pause. Copy, Alpha 1. QRF is spinning up. ETA 20 minutes to your current grid. Can you provide more specifics on the wildlife threat? 20 minutes. We had to hold position for 20 minutes in terrain where that thing could come back at any moment. Negative on specifics at this time, I replied. We'll provide full debrief upon extraction. Alpha 1 is holding position at checkpoint Delta 4. Understood, Alpha 1. Be advised, trainee team is being redirected to alternate extraction point. Maintain your position. The radio went silent, leaving just the three of us in the fog and darkness, surrounded by forest that suddenly felt far more hostile than it had any right to be. "You think it's gone?" Drew asked quietly. I thought about those eyes, about the way it had moved, about that sensation of being claimed. "No," I said honestly. "I don't think it's gone. I think it's watching." We set up a proper defensive perimeter, each of us taking a sector of observation. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every shadow in the fog became a potential threat. Every sound, and there were plenty of them now, the forest coming back to life after the oppressive silence that thing had created, made us tense and ready for contact. 10 minutes in, Drew spoke up. "Captain, you ever heard of anything like this? In all your time in service?" I thought about it. I'd served in some strange places, heard stories from other soldiers about unexplained encounters in remote areas. There were always tales, things that got passed around in hushed conversations during night watches or over beers in dive bars near base. But this was different. This wasn't a vague story or second-hand account. This was real, immediate, and terrifying. "No," I admitted. This is something else entirely." "The local hunters," Drew said slowly. "They have stories about things in these mountains, things that look like animals but aren't. They call them different names, not deer, wrong things, walkers. I always thought it was just superstition, you know? Stories to spook kids or explain away weird wildlife behavior. But now you're not so sure," Cole finished for him. Drew nodded. "My grandfather used to hunt these mountains. He told me once, when I was maybe 12 or 13, that there were parts of the forest you didn't go into at night. Not because of bears or anything normal like that. He said there were places where the rules were different, where things that looked like God's creatures moved with the devil's purpose. I thought he was just being dramatic." "What happened if you went into those places?" I asked. Drew was quiet for a moment. He said most people who did came back. Wrong. Changed. Like something had marked them, claimed them. They'd never be quite right again. They'd wake up screaming about eyes in the darkness. They'd refuse to go into the woods, even in daylight. Some of them just up and vanished one day, walked into the forest, and never came back. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October cold. "This thing we saw, you think it was claiming us? Like your grandfather's stories?" "I don't know what to think anymore, Captain. But I know what I felt when it looked at us. It wasn't like being looked at by an animal. It was like being examined by something that was deciding whether we were worth keeping or disposing of." Cole had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Whatever it was, we need to report it. People need to know there's something out here that's not right." "And say what?" I countered. "That we saw a deer with weird eyes and got spooked? They'll laugh us out of the service." "With all due respect, sir," Cole said, an edge in his voice, "I don't give a damn if they laugh. There are soldiers training in these mountains every day. If there's something out here that's a threat, they need to know." He was right, of course, but I also knew how the military worked. Unexplained encounters, reports of things that didn't fit into neat categories, they got buried. Soldiers who made too much noise about weird experiences got labeled as unreliable, got passed over for promotions, got quietly shuffled to positions where they couldn't cause trouble. Before I could respond, my radio crackled with a new voice, the QRF commander. "Alpha 1, this is Raptor 6. We are inbound to your position, ETA 5 minutes. Advise if you are still in contact with the hostile wildlife." Hostile wildlife. The clinical, sterile term made me want to laugh hysterically. That thing was many things, but wildlife didn't begin to cover it. "Raptor 6, Alpha 1. Negative contact at this time. Last visual approximately 15 minutes ago. Copy Alpha 1, stand by for extraction." The next 5 minutes were the longest of my life. We maintained our defensive positions, weapons ready, scanning the darkness for any sign of that thing returning. The fog had thickened even more, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Every shift in the breeze, every rustling leaf became a potential threat. Then we heard them, the heavy diesel engines of military vehicles, the metallic clank of equipment, the structured calls of soldiers moving in tactical formation. Never in my life had I been so relieved to hear the sounds of the U.S. Army at work. The QRF was a squad of 8 soldiers led by a young lieutenant I'd worked with before named Jackson. They moved with professional efficiency, establishing a perimeter around our position while Jackson made his way to me. "Captain Markham," he said, offering a crisp salute that I returned. "Raptor 6, what's the situation?" I looked at Drew and Cole, then back at Jackson. What was the situation? How did I explain what we'd experienced in a way that wouldn't sound insane? We encountered what appeared to be a white-tailed deer exhibiting highly unusual behavior, I began, keeping my voice professional and measured. Aggressive posture, abnormal movement patterns, and physical characteristics inconsistent with normal wildlife. We deemed it a potential threat to training operations and called for support. Jackson nodded, pulling out a tactical notepad. "Can you be more specific about the physical characteristics?" I could feel Drew and Cole watching me, waiting to see how much I would reveal. I made a decision. Scarring around the neck and body, malformed antlers, unusual eye coloration, movement patterns that suggested possible disease, rabies maybe, or some kind of neurological disorder. It was behaving erratically and aggressively enough that I felt we needed additional support to secure the area. It wasn't a complete lie. Everything I'd said was technically true. I just wasn't mentioning the parts that sounded like they came from a horror movie. Jackson wrote notes, then looked up. "Did you engage the animal?" "Negative. We maintained observation and attempted to draw it away from the trainee route. It eventually retreated into the forest." "Any signs of it since?" "None, but I'd recommend suspending training operations in this sector until we can conduct a daylight reconnaissance and ensure the area is clear." Jackson nodded. "Understood, sir. I'll make the recommendation to command. In the meantime, let's get you and your team back to base for debrief." We loaded up into the armored Humvees, the QRF maintaining security as we prepared to depart. As the vehicles rumbled to life, and we began the journey back to Camp Dawson proper, I looked out the window into the fog-shrouded forest. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between the trees, I knew it was still watching. The ride back to base was quiet. None of us spoke about what we'd seen. The QRF soldiers made small talk about the exercise, complained about being pulled from their downtime, made jokes about deer season starting early. Normal soldier stuff. But Drew, Cole, and I sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what had just happened. When we arrived at the operations center, we were separated for individual debriefings, standard procedure for any incident involving QRF activation. I was escorted to a small conference room where Major Patricia Hensley, the base operations officer, was waiting with a laptop and recorder. "Captain Markham," she said, gesturing to a seat, "walk me through what happened tonight." I gave her the sanitized version, the same professional clinical account I'd given Jackson. Unusual deer behavior, potential disease vector, precautionary QRF call to secure the training area. I kept my voice steady, my report factual, my demeanor calm. 20 years in the military had taught me how to deliver a briefing that told the truth without revealing everything. Major Hensley listened without interruption, taking notes on her laptop. When I finished, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Captain, I've reviewed the initial reports from Sergeant Reddington and Specialist Halverson. Their accounts align with yours, which is good for documentation purposes." She paused. "However, there are some discrepancies in the details that concern me." My pulse quickened. "What kind of discrepancies, ma'am?" Specialist Halverson's report includes mentions of thermal anomalies, unusual vocalizations, and movement patterns inconsistent with known wildlife. Sergeant Reddington noted the same observations, plus some additional details about the animal's physical characteristics that go beyond simple disease markers. She closed her laptop and looked at me directly. "Captain, I need you to tell me, off the record, what you actually saw out there." For a long moment, I considered it. Consider telling her everything: the segmented body rotation, the claiming sensation, the impossible teeth, the way it vanished from thermal without a trace. But then I thought about my career, about Drew and Cole's futures, about being labeled as the crazy officer who saw monsters in the woods. Ma'am, with all due respect, what's in my report is what I observed. If Reddington and Halverson noted additional details, those observations should be evaluated on their own merit. But, from my perspective as the officer in charge, we encountered wildlife exhibiting behavior that warranted a precautionary response. Major Hensley studied me for several seconds, then nodded slowly. Understood, Captain. For the record, I'm recommending that the eastern training sectors be temporarily suspended for wildlife assessment. We'll have forestry services conduct a sweep of the area over the next few days. That seems prudent, ma'am. You're dismissed, Captain. Get some rest. We'll follow up if we need additional information. I stood, saluted, and left the conference room. Outside, I found Drew and Cole waiting in the hallway, both looking as drained as I felt. How'd it go? Cole asked. Professionally, I replied. You? Same. They seemed more interested in checking boxes than actually understanding what happened. Drew had his arms crossed, staring at the floor. My grandfather was right, he said quietly. Some things in these mountains aren't meant to be understood. They're just meant to be avoided. We walked to the barracks together, none of us speaking. What was there to say? We'd encountered something that defied explanation, something that existed in the space between what we know to be real and what we fear might be possible. Over the following weeks, I watched the official reports get processed and filed. The Forestry Service conducted their sweep and found nothing unusual, no signs of diseased wildlife, no evidence of the creature we'd described. Training operations in the eastern sectors were suspended for a month, then quietly resumed. Our incident became just another file in the base archives categorized under Wildlife Encounter Precautionary Response. But the three of us who were there that night, we knew the truth. Drew requested a transfer 6 months later, cited family reasons, went back to civilian life. Last I heard, he'd stopped hunting entirely. Cole finished out his contract and retired, moved to Arizona where the terrain is open and you can see for miles in every direction. He doesn't talk about that night, but I know he thinks about it. We all do. As for me, I'm still at Camp Dawson, still training soldiers, still running night exercises through those same forests. But I'm careful now about where I send people. There are certain areas I avoid, certain ridge lines and valleys that we route around without explanation. And sometimes, on foggy October nights when the visibility is low and the forest goes quiet, I'll catch myself scanning the tree line, looking for a thermal signature that shows patches of living and dead tissue, watching for eyes that glow red in the darkness, listening for that dry, rasping vocalization that sounds almost like words in a language I don't want to understand, because I know it's still out there, still watching, still claiming. The Appalachian Mountains hold secrets that predate our understanding of the natural world. The indigenous peoples who lived here for thousands of years before European settlement, they knew. They had names for these things, stories passed down through generations, warnings about places where the rules were different. We call them not deer now, these things that wear the shape of familiar animals but move with alien purpose. We try to rationalize them, explain them away as disease or misidentification or overactive imagination. But those of us who've looked into their eyes, who felt that sensation of being claimed by something that exists outside the normal boundaries of predator and prey, we know better. Drew's grandfather was right. There are places in these mountains you don't go at night, not because of bears or wolves or any natural predator, but because there are things out there that look like God's creatures but move with intentions we can't begin to comprehend. And if you ever find yourself in the Appalachian wilderness on a foggy October night, and you see what looks like a deer watching you from the tree line, pay attention to its eyes. Pay attention to how it moves. Pay attention to that deep, instinctive part of your brain that screams wrongness. Because not every deer is just a deer, and once it's claimed you, once you've been marked by those burning red eyes and that knowing gaze, you'll carry that knowledge for the rest of your life. Trust me, I know.